My son, the man I poured every ounce of my life into, looked me in the eye and called me a nuisance, a problem that needed to be managed. He told me to find somewhere else to go just hours after I'd confessed I'd lost the factory job I'd held for 35 years. He shut the door of his gleaming Chicago penthouse on me, leaving me on the cold marble floor of the hallway. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that I was secretly the sole heir to an $8 million fortune. And in that moment, with the click of his deadbolt echoing in my ears, I decided he was about to learn a lesson, not just about money, but about the true staggering cost of a human heart. My name is Susan. For more than 3 decades, my existence was charted by the violent shriek of my alarm clock at 4:30 in the morning. In the silent pre-dawn gloom of my modest house in Gary, Indiana, I'd stand in the kitchen, forcing down instant coffee that tasted like rust. Then came the drive to the Great Lakes Assembly Plant. That place was not just a job. It was a cathedral of noise and industry, filled with the constant roar of machinery and the acrid smell of hot steel. It was also the promise I made to my husband, Robert, the day we stood in the cemetery, his casket still fresh in the earth. Our son David was only 7. His small hand was a trembling bird in mine, and as I looked at his confused, tear-streaked face, I swore to Robert that our boy would have everything. He would get the Ivy League education we never could, a life of clean hands and a straight back, a world away from the grit and grime that I called my own. And I kept that promise. I bled for it. Every holiday I worked, every weekend of overtime I grabbed, every company barbecue I missed to put in a few more hours on the line, it was all for David. When he was accepted to a prestigious university near Chicago, I did not just pay the tuition. I refinanced the house Robert and I had bought together, to ensure he had a single room, a quiet sanctuary for his studies. When he needed his first car, I bought him a brand new 5-star safety-rated Volvo, a fortress on wheels, while I kept driving my old Toyota Camry, its dashboard held together with duct tape. And when he announced he was buying his first home, a breathtaking condo of glass and steel piercing the Chicago skyline, I drained what was left of my 401k for his down payment. I never hesitated. I never saw it as a loss. It was an investment in his life, his happiness. My dividend was meant to be the sight of him succeeding, clad in suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, living a life I had only seen in magazines. But the higher David ascended, the more distant he became. It was as if he were embarrassed by the greasy, calloused rungs of the ladder he had used for his climb. Our phone calls, once long rambling chats, dwindled to brief, almost transactional check-ins. His visits home became rare, then they simply stopped. He was always on the brink of a major deal, always had a crucial networking dinner, always had obligations with his polished girlfriend, Chloe. I tried to be understanding. This was the life I had wanted for him. But a chasm was opening between us, wide and silent. I was his working-class mother from the Rust Belt, and he was a master of the universe. We had forgotten how to speak the same language. Then, at 61 years old, the ground beneath my feet dissolved. The plant, a bastion of American manufacturing for nearly a century, was acquired by a foreign investment firm and systematically dismantled. My 35 years of loyalty were rewarded with a paltry severance check and a patronizing speech from an HR kid who looked like he had just graduated college. In a single afternoon, I went from being a provider to a liability. The severance pay and my remaining savings felt like a glass of water poured onto hot sand, disappearing before my eyes. The prospect of finding another job at my age felt like trying to scale a glass wall. It was during that week of sheer terror, while I sat at my kitchen table staring at a stack of bills that seemed to mock me, that a peculiar letter arrived. The envelope was thick and creamy, bearing the embossed name of a prestigious law firm from Seattle. My hands trembled as I tore it open. It was about the estate of my Aunt Agnes. I had only met her a handful of times. She was my father's fiercely independent sister, a reclusive woman who had shrewdly invested in Seattle real estate decades ago and amassed a fortune. She lived a quiet life on a bluff overlooking Puget Sound. She'd call me once a year, her voice raspy over the phone, asking about the plant, about David. She always said she admired a woman who was not afraid of hard work. I never knew she was a multimillionaire. I certainly never dreamed she would leave her entire estate to me, her niece who spent her days on an assembly line. The number in the document seemed like a misprint. $8 million. I traced the words with my finger, the ink blurring as my eyes filled with tears. I was no longer a laid-off factory worker facing a desolate future. I was wealthy. My first gut-wrenching instinct was to grab my phone, to call David, to share the miraculous news, and tell him all our worries were over. But a cold, sharp thought pierced through the euphoria. For years, I had felt like nothing more than a bank to him, an ATM he visited for a withdrawal when he needed it. If he knew about this money, would any affection he showed me be genuine, or would it be aimed at the fortune, not the mother? A small, bruised part of my soul needed to know who my son truly was. So I designed a test, a cruel, simple test. I would go to him not as an heiress, but as a desperate woman at the end of her rope. I would ask for the one thing I had so freely given him his entire life, a safe place to land. I had to see the character of the man I had raised. I drove my old Toyota all the way to Chicago, my heart hammered against my ribs with a rhythm of hope and fear. His building was a monument to wealth, a blade of glass and steel with a doorman who looked at my dusty car and me as if we were something unpleasant the wind had blown in. When David finally opened his apartment door, his face was a mask of pure irritation. My presence was an unwelcome stain on his perfectly curated life. His home was cold and vast, like a showroom, stark, minimalist furniture, enormous abstract paintings that screamed of money but said nothing, and a view of the city that I knew was worth a king's ransom. "Mom," he said, his tone flat. He did not move aside to let me in. "What's going on? I'm right in the middle of something." "It will just take a minute, honey," I said, gently moving past him into the cavernous living room. I perched on the edge of a severe-looking sofa that felt less like a place to rest and more like a sculpture. I took a deep, shaky breath and laid out my story. The planned closure, the job loss, the fear of losing my house. I did not embellish or plead. I simply told him the truth, the version of the truth before $8 million, and then I made my request. I was hoping, just for a little while, David, just until I can get on my feet. I was wondering if I could stay here, in your guest room. I won't be in the way at all, I promise. The silence that followed was immense and crushing. David did not even look at me. He walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and stared out at the sprawling city below. He let out a long, dramatic sigh, a performance of exasperation that cut me deeper than any angry word. He rubbed his temples as if I had presented him with an impossible, tragic burden. "Mom, I just can't," he said, finally turning. There was no sympathy in his eyes, only frustration. "I can't have you living here. It's just not feasible. Chloe and I have our life, our routine. We entertain. This isn't a large space." I looked around the enormous open-plan condo. It was 3 times the size of the little house where I had raised him. "David, I'm not asking for a handout. I wouldn't be a burden. I just need a place to sleep, a month or 2 at most." He shook his head, his jaw set like stone. "A burden is a burden, Mom. Look, I'm sorry about the job. I really am. But you're an adult. You'll have to find another solution. Maybe you can look into one of those senior living communities or something." Senior living communities. He said it so easily, like suggesting a new brand of cereal. He was casting me off. He was disposing of me like an old piece of furniture that no longer matched his decor. I had spent my life ensuring he would never face a moment of uncertainty, and in my one and only time of need, he treated me like an inconvenient stranger. In that instant, something inside me did not just break, it hardened into diamond. The last wisp of maternal hope that I had carried into that penthouse vanished, replaced by a cold, brilliant, and absolute clarity. I saw him then, not as my little boy, but as the man he had become, selfish, ungrateful, and utterly oblivious to the mountain of sacrifice upon which his life was built. The $8 million secret felt like a suit of armor forming around my shattered heart. I stood up, my back straighter, my gaze unwavering. "You're right, David," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. "I'll find another solution." I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a tear. I simply turned and walked toward the door. He did not try to stop me. He just stood there, a statue of relief, and let me go. As I drove away from that gleaming tower, leaving my son and the life I built for him behind, a new strategy was already taking root in my mind. The lesson had only just begun. Instead of revealing anything, I leaned into the role he had given me. I found a small, clean, one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood he would never dream of visiting. It was a simple, working-class part of Chicago, with brick buildings and families on the front stoops. I sold my old car, learned the routes of the CTA buses and trains, and started dressing in my old, comfortable clothes again. To the outside world, and more importantly to my son, I was exactly what he believed me to be, a down-on-her-luck old woman, clinging to her dignity by a thread. But my reality was a world away. I hired a team of financial managers, the best in the business. I immersed myself in a new language of portfolios, trusts, and endowments. I managed my new fortune with the same meticulous dedication I had given the assembly line. My first act was to create a charitable foundation in my late husband's name, the Robert Miller Opportunity Grant. Its mission was simple: to provide scholarships and trade school grants to children from low-income industrial communities. I was using my money to give other kids the kind of leg up I had given David. Months went by. I did not hear from him. Not a call, not a text, not a single word. He had excised me from his life as cleanly as removing a line item from a budget. And the strangest part, I was thriving. I was finally living for me. I took a solo trip to see the Grand Canyon, a lifelong dream. I flew to Seattle and walked the rugged coastline where Aunt Agnes had built her empire, feeling a connection to the formidable woman I barely knew. I was rediscovering Susan, the person who existed outside of being David's mom. Then one Tuesday night, my phone rang. It was him. A foolish flicker of hope sparked in my chest, and I immediately extinguished it. I knew this was not a call to see how I was. "Mom?" His voice was thin, stretched tight with a panic he was failing to hide. "Hey, how are things?" "I'm getting by, David," I said, my voice deliberately weary. "The bus is an adventure, but I'm making it work. What's wrong?" He exhaled a ragged, shaky sound. "I'm in a jam, Mom, a really bad one. I made a bad call, an aggressive play on a new biotech firm. It was supposed to be a sure thing. It was not. It was all smoke and mirrors. I got wiped out, Mom. I lost everything." I said nothing, letting his words hang in the silence. "I'm in serious trouble," he finally whispered, his voice cracking. "The bank is calling in my loans. I'm going to lose the condo if I can't come up with some capital immediately." The condo, the very same home that had no room for his mother, but plenty of room for his ego. The irony was so potent it was almost a physical taste. But I held my character. "Oh, David, that's terrible," I said, my voice filled with powerless sympathy. "I wish there was something I could do." "That's why I'm calling," he said, his tone shifting from despair to urgency. "I need you to help me. I need a loan, $100,000, just to stop the bleeding, to get the bank off my back until I can land on my feet." $100,000. To the new me, it was a rounding error. To him, it was salvation, and he had the gall to ask me, the woman he thought was living on fumes, for it. "David," I sighed, letting a long, heavy pause stretch out. $100,000? Son, I lost my job of 35 years. I'm living in a tiny apartment on what's left of my savings. Where on earth do you think I would get that kind of money?" I heard a sound of pure frustration on his end, a strangled growl. "I don't know. Your severance? The 401k? You have to have something left. Mom, this is my life we're talking about." He was not asking anymore. He was demanding. He was not pleading for a rescue. He was trying to collect on a debt he felt I owed him. He saw me as a forgotten emergency fund he had the right to crack open. That was it. That was the final confirmation. He had learned nothing. I told him to meet me for breakfast the next day. I chose a spot near my apartment, a classic greasy spoon diner with cracked red vinyl booths and coffee that was more brown than it was flavorful. He showed up looking like a ghost. His expensive suit was crumpled and dark circles were carved under his eyes. He was a creature of glass and steel, completely out of his element amongst the formica and fluorescent lights. He skipped the pleasantries and launched into a desperate, rambling monologue about his financial collapse. I just listened, my expression a placid mask of maternal concern, taking slow sips of my coffee. When he finally wound down, breathless and staring at me with the raw hope of a drowning man, I set my mug down with a deliberate click. "So you need my help," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Yes, Mom, more than anything," he pleaded, leaning forward. "That's interesting," I said, my eyes drifting to the window, "because I remember a time just a few months ago when I needed your help. I was not asking for money, David. I was just asking for a place to sleep in your guest room. Do you remember what you told me?" He visibly recoiled, his gaze dropped to the scarred tabletop. "Mom, I know I was wrong. I handled that terribly. I was stressed, okay? This is different." "Is it?" I leaned in, my voice dropping lower, forcing him to look at me. "Is it really different? Or is it just that our roles are reversed? You told me, and I believe your exact words were, 'It's just not feasible.' You told me to find another solution. You established the terms of our relationship, David. You made it clear that your life and my problems were entirely separate. You were the one who cut the safety net. You do not get to demand I stitch it back together just because you're the one falling." His face twisted with disbelief, then flushed with rage. "Are you serious? You're going to hold that against me? I'm your son." A short, dry laugh escaped me. "Yes, you are my son, and I am the woman who gave you everything and asked for nothing in return but a shred of human decency. And when the time came, you failed the test. This is not about a grudge, David. A grudge is an emotion. This is about consequences. It's a lesson in cause and effect. You treated me like an object to be discarded when it became inconvenient. You do not get to treat me like a solution now that you're in trouble." He stared at me, his mouth agape. He was seeing me for the first time, not as his meek, accommodating mother, but as a woman forged in steel. "I'm sorry, David," I said, and a part of me truly was. I was sorry for the man he had chosen to be. "I can't help you." He shot out of his seat, the chair legs screaming against the linoleum. The whole diner turned to stare. "Fine!" he hissed, his voice trembling with fury. "Just fine. I don't need you. I never did." He slapped a $50 bill on the table and stormed out, leaving the stench of his own failure hanging in the air. I watched him go, and for the first time in months, I felt no pain, no anger, just a deep, profound peace. I had given him his final, most important lesson. Whether he learned from it was now up to him. Perhaps losing that glass tower, perhaps hitting the rock bottom he so thoroughly deserved, would finally teach him the one thing my lifetime of sacrifice never could. Your character is the only currency that truly matters. I paid the bill and walked out into the afternoon sun. I felt lighter than I had in decades. My son would never see me as a burden again. But more importantly, I would never again see his success as my purpose. My real fortune was not the $8 million. It was the freedom I had just claimed. My wealth was my own now, to honor my husband and to build a new legacy, one of kindness and opportunity. David would have to build his own future from the rubble. And I, for the first time in a very long time, was incredibly excited to get on with building mine.